The United States imports billions of dollars of beef from Australia, but Australia doesn't allow the importation of beef from the US at all, which is exactly the kind of trade imbalance that proves why Trump's tariffs are necessary. This claim has gained a lot of popularity on social media lately, mostly because it's a claim that the president himself made while he was announcing his tariff plan.
You have Australia bans, and they're wonderful people and wonderful everything, but they ban American beef, yet we imported $3 billion of Australian beef from them just last year alone. They won't take any of our beef.
Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming repeated this narrative on Fox News a few days later.
Australia has sold $29 billion worth of beef in the United States, and we haven't been able to sell one hamburger.
And of course, Fox News was able to find farmers like this one in Illinois willing to repeat the narrative as well.
Some of the European countries and Australia have been difficult for us to sell beef in, and so they get to sell beef into our country, and we're happy to have them compete against us, but we'd like the same chance to sell the great taste of American beef to them.
Understanding the full story around this claim is a pretty good example of why this whole tariff fiasco is so nonsensical. Australia used to import beef from the United States, however they stopped in 2003 when beef imported from the US was found to be infected with mad cow disease. Australia has since subjected fresh beef imports to a biosecurity review that requires the export country to adhere to certain conditions, which includes the stipulation that imported beef comes from cows that have lived in the compliant country for their entire lives. The United States imports much of the cattle that it processes into beef, which requires more clearance from Australian authorities, which are ongoing. It's worth keeping in mind, though, that these are all requirements that the United States has for countries from which it imports beef as well. If the United States were willing to only export beef to Australia that comes from cows that weren't imported, this beef would be available to Australian importers. So far it isn't. But this is largely beside the point. Since the original mad cow disease outbreak that initially caused Australia to halt imports from the US, Australian beef production has grown to far exceed domestic consumption. In other words, there is no market in Australia for foreign beef, which shouldn't really surprise anyone considering Australia's population is roughly the same as the population of Florida. US consumers, especially those who frequent fast food restaurants, which are the primary importers of Australian beef, simply have a greater demand for foreign beef than Australian consumers because the US market is orders of magnitude larger than the Australian market. And there's no inherent problem with that. US farmers export 500 million pounds of beef a year. We have enough trade partners for our farmers. While some farmers might theoretically like having more competition to purchase their beef, that doesn't justify making beef more expensive for US consumers, which is what tariffs on Australian beef do. It's basically a tax you're paying on McDonald's cheeseburgers without any benefit. Trump sold a nonsensical solution to a largely non-existent problem to his base in his bid to get elected, and we're all footing the bill. That's all this is.